"You are not the Duke," Cressida-born said, and the man in the plain grey coat went very still over his account book. He had thought himself careful. He had thought the worn cuffs and the ink-stained fingers a perfect disguise, the steward's stupor thing he had practiced before his glass like a green boy rehearsing a bow. And yet here she stood in the doorway of the estate office, a single candle throwing gold across her face, looking at him as though she had read the whole of him in a glance. "No, miss," Elias said, keeping his voice low and even, the voice he had borrowed for a fortnight now. "I am only Mr. Vane, the Duke's steward." "Forgive me." Colour rose in her cheeks. "I have startled you. I could not sleep, and I thought to find a book of accounts dull enough to send me off again." She smiled, and the smile undid something in his chest. "It seems I have found instead a man who guards them at midnight." He should have sent her away. A steward did not sit alone past midnight with a gentlewoman who had come to the estate as a prospective bride, for that was what she was, the daughter of an old friend of his late father's, brought to Edgemere under a vague understanding that the Duke might look upon her favourably, that a match might be made if the parties suited. The Duke. He had not been able to bear the thought of it. A woman shipped to him like a parcel, smiling at his title and his rent rolls, measuring his rooms for her own ambition. So he had done a mad thing. He had told his real steward to keep to the south wing, had put on this grey coat, and had set himself to take her honest measure before she ever knew which man was the Duke. 2 weeks he had watched her. 2 weeks, and he no longer trusted himself to be sensible about anything at all. "Sit, if you wish," he heard himself say. "The fire has not gone out." She sat. She did not perch on the edge of the chair as a schemer might, all careful grace for an audience. She sat as a tired woman sits, drawing her shawl close, her bare hand reaching toward the warmth. On the table between them lay the great ledger, and beside his right hand, half hidden under a fold of his sleeve, the one thing he had not been able to leave behind, his signet ring, the crest of Edgemere cut deep in gold, which he turned over and over in his fingers when he forgot himself. He stopped turning it now and slid it deeper into shadow. "Tell me, Mr. Vane," she said, "is he kind, your master?" It was not the question he had braced for. He had braced for, is he rich, is he handsome, will he take me to town? Why do you ask that, of all things? Because everyone speaks of his name and his lands and his temper, and no one will tell me whether he is kind. She looked into the fire. "I should like to know what manner of man I am to be measured against. They sent me here as one sends a horse to a buyer. I am not such a fool that I don't know it, but I had rather marry a kind poor man than a cruel rich one, and since I am to have no choice in the riches, I should at least like the truth about the kindness." Elias was silent. In the village he was called Edgemere the Cold. He knew the name. He had earned a measure of it, after a life that had taught him to keep the doors of himself bolted. "He is not cruel," he said at last. "I will tell you that much. But he is not easy either. He has been illy used by people who wanted things from him, and a man so used learns to expect it, and grows hard to know." She turned her grey eyes on him. "That is the kindest unkind thing anyone has said of him. You are fond of him." "I have known him a long time," Elias said, which was nothing but the truth. The candle burned down. They talked of the estate, of the leaking roof in the east cottages that he, as steward, was meant to be fretting over, and which she at once began to fret over too, asking after the families who lived there, whether the children were warm, whether the old woman at the end of the lane still had her cough. He found that she knew the cottagers' names. She had walked out among them in her first week, before anyone thought to stop her, and had carried broth and a basket, and had sat an hour with the old woman with the cough, and had told no one of it, and had asked nothing in return. He had not known that. He sat in his steward's coat and learned that the woman they had sent him had been quietly doing the work of a duchess for a fortnight, while he skulked about testing her. He went up to his rooms, his true rooms, by a back stair. where his valet waited with a face carefully blank and did not sleep. The next day he watched her in the daylight, and the day after that, and each day the ground gave way a little more beneath him. He saw her stop the bullying of a scullery boy by a footman, not with a great scene, but with one quiet word and a hand on the boy's shoulder. He saw her give up her own warm seat by the long gallery window to a shivering old housekeeper, and laugh it off when thanked, as though it were nothing. He saw her once, alone in the chapel, kneeling not in display, but in the plain attitude of a woman who truly prayed, and he stood in the doorway in his grey coat and felt himself a thief, stealing the sight of her unguarded soul. "You watch me a great deal, Mr. Vane," she said to him one grey afternoon in the library, not unkindly, looking up from the book she had taken down. "I have noticed it. I hope I have not given offence." "No offence, miss." His mouth was dry. "I beg your pardon. I will be more careful." "I did not say I disliked it." She closed the book. "It is only that you watch me the way a man watches to see whether a thing he hopes for is real. I cannot think what you should hope for from me. I am nobody, a poor gentlewoman sent here to be looked over, who will likely be sent home again when the Duke finds me wanting." "He will not find you wanting." It came out of him before he could stop it, too quick, too sure. She tilted her head. "How can you know what the Duke will think?" And there it was, the moment, opening before him like a door he had built himself and now stood afraid to walk through. He had taken her measure. He had found her true beyond anything he had hoped or feared. And now he had to give her his, and he was, for the first time in his hard and guarded life, afraid of being found wanting himself. "Cressida," he said, and saw her startle, for a steward did not use a gentlewoman's given name. "I must tell you something, and I am ashamed of it, and I would have you hear it all before you judge me. You are frightening me, Mr. Vane." "That is the first of it. I am not Mr. Vane." He drew his hand from his sleeve and opened it, and there in his broad palm lay the signet ring with the Edgemere crest cut deep in gold. He did not put it on. He only let her see it, let her look from the ring to his face and back, and watched the understanding move across her like cloud shadow over a field. "You are the Duke," she whispered. "I am Elias, the Duke of Edgemere." "Yes." He made himself hold her eyes. "When they wrote that they were sending me a bride to look over, I could not stomach it, to be smiled at for my name by a stranger who wanted my rooms. So I put on this coat and told myself I would learn the truth of you before I ever let you learn the truth of me. It was a coward's trick and a liar's, and I have no defense for it except that has cost me dear." "Cost you?" Her voice had gone very quiet. "You lied to me for a fortnight." "Yes." "You let me speak to you of the Duke's kindness to your face, and say nothing." "Yes. God forgive me." He set the ring down on the table between them, gold on dark wood. "I will not blame you if you take that to your father and tell him what the Duke of Edgemere is, a man who hides in his own house and spies on the woman they sent him. You may go home with your honor higher than mine, but I could not let you marry me or refuse me in ignorance. I had to stand before you as myself and tell you that the man you have shamed by your kindness this whole fortnight is the Duke, and that he stopped, the hardest words of his life, and they would not come at a run. "That he has lost his heart to you," he said low, before he ever found the courage to confess who he was. The library was very still. The fire spoke softly to itself. Cressida Bourne looked at the ring, and then at the man before her, the plain grey coat over the fine linen at his throat, the ink-stained fingers, the proud guarded face she had been speaking to as a friend for 14 days, and Elias watched her and could not breathe. "You spoke of him to me," she said slowly, "as a man ill-used, who had learned to expect the worst and grown hard to know." "I did. And I thought that is the kindest unkind thing anyone has said of the Duke." She rose. She came around the table. She stood close enough that he could see the small escaping curl at her temple and the steadiness in her grey eyes. You were speaking of yourself. I was. Then I will tell you what I told you that first night by the fire. She lifted the ring from the table and held it, and did not give it back, and did not put it down. I had rather a kind poor man than a cruel rich one. And you, Elias, have spent a fortnight being a poor man to me, a steward in a worn coat, and you were kind. Not the easy kindness that wants to be seen, the other kind. I saw it. I was taking your measure too, you understand. I did not know you were a duke. I only knew you were a good man who watched the world as though he had been hurt by it, and I found I did not want to leave Edgemere and never see Mr. Vane again. His heart was going like a drum, and now that Mr. Vane is the duke? Now I find, she said, and her mouth trembled toward a smile, that I shall not have to lose him after all. He took her hand, the hand that held his ring, and bowed his head over it, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, the steward's coat and the gentlewoman's plain gown close in the firelight, the gold crest pressed between their two palms. He did not kiss her. He only held her hand against his bowed head as a man holds a thing he had thought never to be allowed, and she let him, and laid her free hand light upon his dark hair. I had meant to do this properly, he said at last, unsteadily, against her fingers, to put off the coat and dress as a duke and come to you in state and ask your father for the honour. I find I cannot wait for any of it. Then do not. She drew him up by the hand until he stood straight before her, tall and broad and no longer stooping, the Duke of Edgemere at last in a steward's coat. Ask me here, as Mr. Vane, who is also Elias in this plain grey coat. I should like to remember that you asked me before you put the title back on. So he did. There in the library, with the rain beginning soft against the glass and the fire low, and the ring already warm in her keeping, the Duke of Edgemere asked Cressida Bourne to be his wife, not as a lord measuring a match, but as a man who had hidden in plain coats and ink stains to learn the truth of her, and had been wholly and gladly conquered by it. She said yes. And when, weeks later, he stood beside her in his proper state at last, in the fine dark coat and the high collar that the world expected of him, she leaned and whispered that she liked him very nearly as well as she had liked the steward, and he laughed, the cold Duke of Edgemere, a real and helpless laugh, the first that anyone at that great house had heard from him in years. They were married before the spring was out. And all his long life after, whenever the world weighed heavy on him, the Duke would put on an old grey coat to walk his fields, and his Duchess would smile to see it, and know herself the most truly chosen of women, measured first and loved before she ever knew his name,